Many people in relationships often wonder, why do we seem to face the same issues over and over again, no matter what we try? This common frustration is frequently rooted in limiting beliefs that shape our perceptions and behaviors, preventing us from growing and achieving our full potential. These beliefs can create invisible barriers that hinder our progress and satisfaction in relationships. To overcome these challenges, it's essential to understand how to effectively set and achieve relationship goals that foster growth, connection, and mutual fulfillment. That being said, make sure that you stay tuned all the way through to the end because I think throughout this conversation, we're going to unpack some things that can be quite insightful and hopefully influential in your life as it pertains to you looking to fully develop mature relationships. So, that said, I kind of want to put a disclaimer out because I think it's important. Again, on this particular platform, the Empowerment Perspective platform, we believe 100% that everybody is a subject matter expert of their own opinion. So that being said, this is a place where opinions, thoughts, and most of all, questions are invited. So whatever questions that you have, by all means, bring them, and we're open to talking about them, discussing them in real time. So that said, let's kind of get this party started. Listen, go ahead and hit the like button, regardless of where you are, because again, that's going to be important as we push forward. So, Lisa, this conversation is titled "How to Overcome Limiting Beliefs in Relationships." Now, when you've seen those two words in the same sentence, limiting, well, I mean, those two ideas, limiting beliefs in relationships, what was like the first thought that came to your mind? I'm just curious.
Limit of a limit of information. So you started with limited information. When you enter into something and you have limited information, there's going to be these unnecessary trials that we have to go through because we were not equipped for what we were going into.
Okay. When I kind of first got wind of this for me, like when I understood that, um, the beliefs that I have influenced the relationships that I'm in, it was, it kind of took me, it kind of sat me down for a second because I never considered years ago, especially when I first got married, I never considered that my belief system drove the status of my relationship and influence how I interacted with other people.
Mhm.
So if my belief system drove the status or influenced how I interact with other people, then limiting beliefs kind of create a barrier between me and other people as well. So that was kind of like where I was at when it came down to this, because I think it was essential. I think it was important for us to understand, for me to understand. I say it that way. So I am excited to go ahead and dive into the first question, which is what are common limiting beliefs in relationships and how do you think they were formed?
So one that I thought of was, you have trust issues. And this is just based on the examples that you have had from the onset. Okay? So if you have these examples before you coming into a relationship and seeing the example before you, if they weren't necessarily healthy relationships, or it's going to cause you to have some trust issues. It's going to have you to sometimes sacrifice yourself, you know, sacrifice yourself because you don't really understand what you're entering into. And then you have this model already that's been given you, the example's been given you already, and you're going to take on some of those same, if it's unhealthy, you're going to take on some of those same examples and you're going to carry them into your next relationship, whether that be friendship, uh, you know, uh, marriage, whatever that's going to be, whatever relationship you enter into.
Hmm. I like where you're going with this because I think it's interesting. For me, I think when it comes down to it, there is this looming cloud that exists in our community, and it has us as the victim. So everything that has happened, I am the victim of the outcome of that thing. So if this thing happened, it happened to me, right? So when this happened, it happened to our community. If this happened, it happened to men. If this happened, it happened to women. So in relationship, if this thing was the outcome, then it happened to me. And I never viewed it as a concept of life happening through me instead. So the notion that I am going to bring in when it comes down to the most common, and this is how I see it, the most common limiting beliefs in relationship is victimhood. Being a victim of the outcome of whatever happened in the relationship. That is one of the most common, in my opinion, the most common limiting beliefs. Why is that? Because we can preposition the victim perspective that we're having. So if we look at it from that perspective, as a victim, I am not existing in the relationship fully. It's almost like I'm in the relationship anticipating something happening to me. I am very skittish, I'm reserved, I'm all of those things that identify me as a victim. It's almost like, and I hate to do this, so please just flow with me for a second. If you've ever adopted like a dog or a cat or whatever the case may be, and it's been abused, well, when you go to approach it, it's kind of standoffish, it's kind of skittish. Any sudden moves make that animal nervous, make that animal afraid. And I think for victims in relationship, regardless of whatever happened in the past, and if something happened to that person in the past, I'm not disregarding that. I'm saying that that is a facet of it. Whatever happened to that person in the past, it cannot be brought into the relationship, because when it is brought into that new relationship, what you're doing is you're robbing the relationship of the proper nutrients that it actually needs in order to flourish. So for me, my initial thought is victimhood, because of the simple fact that as a victim, I am now anticipating and waiting for something to happen to me. Your thoughts on that?
I mean, I agree. I mean, victimhood is something that we have to overcome, because if we're coming into something that we have no knowledge of, because no one is really, we never seen the true example of what a relationship is, other than the example that we have, the Christ and the sacrifices that he made for us in relationship, because he loves us so much, not wanting anything but giving everything. And so, yes, victimhood, I would say that was very predominant, because you go into it with with no tools. You go into a relationship with no tools. You don't have the understanding of how to communicate or to express yourself, because you've never been taught. You don't have the. You're not equipped to go into it. So this is why it's so important that we take our time. We get to know who we are. We get to understand what God says, and get and listen to the instructions that He has given us for to have a healthy relationship with Him. First of all, first and foremost. I know we've said this so many times, but I think it bears repeating, because we have got to know that this is our ongoing journey, and we don't have all the answers, but we continue to strive to do better each and every day. And so, yes, victimhood is a great part of it, because we're ill-equipped.
Yeah, I like that, and I agree. I would say, to kind of piggyback off what you're saying, being ill-equipped to deal with the trauma that we've, been through. The other side to it is that some of that is passed down through parenting as well. So whatever my parents been through, they inject that in me when they raise me through the lens of the trauma that they've been through. And so, just like Teresa Austin is saying here, communication can be the outcome of that thing. So now in my communication efforts, I will get to the point of not speaking life into the relationship, but I can actually speak death into the relationship, because the Bible says that life and death is in the power of the tongue. So I will speak death into that actual relationship, because I don't necessarily believe in a positive outcome. Why? Because nothing in my life has ever shown me the possibilities of a fuller and richer relationship. I've seen relationships that existed. And this kind of goes back to what I was saying prior to, that I believe that there's a lot of relationships that exist, but there are very few relationships to where people are thriving. And the reason why they're not thriving is because they have a lot of limiting beliefs as it pertains to relationships. Like, if I can just say this, like, what is the and I'm not asking the question, it's a rhetorical question. But like a person has to really ask themselves, like, what is the loftiest thought that you can have as it pertains to relationship? And it's not Snow White and the Seven Imps. Cut it out. It's not, Rapunzel, none of that other craziness that Walt Disney taught you. Like, what is the highest thought that you can have as it pertains to relationships? Well, knowing you, like knowing you and knowing some of the other people in the chat, the first thought that came to their mind is that the relationship that they have with the Most High. So that is the epitome of all relationships. So you got to look at that relationship and say, okay, what did he do? What does he do so that that relationship can exist? Has nothing to do with the sin I committed, has nothing to do with how bad of a person I am or how good of a person I think I am, has nothing to do with any of those things. Because when we look at his behavior and model his behavior as it pertains to relationships, then there is no limitations. Therefore, now as I look at it within the scope of my own box, what limitations did I already impose on a relationship without any evidence that this person is capable of the thing that I am waiting to hold them guilty of? And that's kind of like what I mean when I say victimhood mentality. So great, great response, and thank you for that. Yes, absolutely. Baggage. Let me see. Cassandra says single-mindedness, going into relationships only with what they feel a relationship should be. Very good. I like that because you're absolutely right. That is a limiting beliefs. And the issue with that moving forward is you hear it in conversation, like what do you bring to the table? Like all of that stuff, like really, like those are like meaningless conversations to have. And I would go a different direction with the whole single-mindedness because a lot of times we get to the point that we're self-sufficient, right? Which means that we make our own money, we pay our own rent, we drive our own car, we got our own job, we got all of those things, but we look at those things as a relationship um, um, enabler. I said it that way. We look at those things as relationship enablers. No, those are not relationship enablers. Like you have friends that aren't dependent upon your car. You got friends that aren't dependent upon you having a job. So why in the space of personal, intimate relationships, we'll bring that into it as though your achievements I really care about. You can have more degrees than a thermometer, but at the end of the day, you could be a terrible communicator. So that's part of that issue as well. So your job does not make you qualified for a relationship. Lisa, anything else you wanted to add in relation to, um, you know, what I said, what anybody else said in the chat?
Um, when I look at this question, one other thing came to mind. What are some of the common limiting beliefs in relationships, and how do you think they performed? And some of those have to be, as I was, preparing myself for the show, uh, this phrase "mindful consumption" came up. It's the same. It's the same phrase as um, considering your ways and examining yourself. That's what I likened it to. And so one of the things that I know that I began to learn that was helpful for me is if I'm having a thought, right? And reframing the thought, like you said, reframing the images of relationships here. Reframing the thought helps us to not think the negative thing. We have to choose to be mindful of what we're consuming. Even if the thought is formed, we have to choose. So we can't always default to a negative thought. We have to say, and I'm going to be transparent here, because when I was married, there was a lot of infidelity in the relationship, and my thought, even after we came to a place where we were healing and growing and changing, I would have the thought, well, you know, maybe that's what's going on again. But I had to choose for my sanity. I had to choose, to think positive. I had to choose to speak life, because staying in something that has had some issues requires us to requires us to really, really, really grow and not continue to bring it up. But if you say you're going to stay in something, and even though there's been some breach of the covenant, then that means that you're going to stay in it, and you have to work on you at this point. It's not both of you guys working together. You guys are going to come back together and work together, but initially you have to work on you. You have to decide why you're staying in this environment. Is it worth it? And I'm saying this to say that a lot of women have these thoughts. We're going to choose to think negative, but we have to choose to think good, because it helps us mentally, and it helps us in the process of healing and growing and being in a healthy relationship.
So you know that just based upon hearing that, I'm assuming, and this
Mhm.
is, and I could be wrong. That's why I say it that way. Just
Mhm.
based upon hearing that, somebody in their mind may have already said, "Well, I don't know. I hear what you're saying, but if this person does this, I'm out." Right? In your opinion, and I know I'm going off script here, so please bear with me for a second. In your opinion, is there, and I'm not trying to rob anybody of their personal preference when I
Mhm.
ask this question. Is that number one, is that a result of a limiting belief? And then number two, if so, what's the issue with that?
It's what a result of limiting beliefs.
If a person does this thing, I'm out. I'm leaving. It's a wrap.
That it can stem from what you like our upbringing, our childhood, some examples that we saw before, or it can come from some reactions from our peers as well. So it this is where you have to really know that you know, um, and you have to say, you have this is where communication comes in. So if you ask me if that's limiting belief, I would say yes, not a hard yes, but I would say yes. I would say yes because you don't know what people are. Sometimes it's best for them maybe to leave because you know they can't handle it. So there's so many. The only reason why I say the soft yes because there's some variables. That's why.
There are always variables. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Mhm.
And I wanted to ask that because number one, I think it's important. Number two, it kind of leads into the next question that we're going to ask here, because there have been some things that come from like teachings from parents, teachings from just our culture overall, and teachings that we've adopted from society. So, how do societal and cultural norms influence our perceptions of relationship?
See now, this right here is part of what I was speaking about a little bit just a few moments ago. Um, they we can be influenced by our peers. We can be influenced by um, our childhood. There's always that remnant or residue of that happening as well. And so we have to be mindful of the relationship that we're in. And so being in the relationship and understanding the value of what that relationship is to you, first of all, I think is the most important thing. So society can influence um, does not can does influence because we hear the relationship conversations all over the place. Everywhere we go there's a relationship conversation, there's a podcast, and it influences how you deal in your relationship. And so that's why it's so important for us to understand that if you're a believer, I'm just speaking to those who are believers, that if you are believers, you understand the model that God has already put in place for believers and how we need to handle relationships, be in relationships. And being on one accord is one of the most important things that we need to be on one accord. And that means that three chords, that's what I'm talking about.
I like it. I love it. And I do apologize. I'm looking over at Instagram a little late, and want to give a shout out to Queenie. She's out there walking the trails. Be safe out there.
Okay.
Um, yeah, I agree. I think when we look at first culture, because I think our culture drives a lot of our behaviors. It drives parenting. It drives communication efforts. It drives behavior overall. And so a lot of times when we look at, and I just use this one as an example, when we look at a combative nature that may exist, you can probably in some instances trace it all the way back to a person's upbringing, trace it all the way back to their family lineage. Stuff like that can be taught within the space of upbringing. And a lot of that, not all of it, but a lot of that is culturally driven. Um, So when you look at things of that nature, the way we communicate with each other, the way that we behave around one another, the way that we interact with each other, those things influence how we not only enter in relationship, but how do we stay in relationship if we choose to stay in relationship. Um, is there an exit strategy when I go into a relationship? Now we're going into societal norms. So societal norms, it's almost like, look, man, I'm not trying to be funny. It's like a crapshoot that leads up to a lottery. And in essence, when you look at societal norms, when it comes down to the perspective of relationship, there's really nothing to hinge on. There is nothing solid. There's nothing concrete. There's nothing practical about it. It's like, well, I'll try this. I'll try this. I'll try this. And I'll try this. And so it's just like, the best version of the guessing game that you can ever imagine. And so societal norms, if you pay close attention to it, they change ever so often. One minute society is focused on this as a norm, then the next is this as a norm, and the next is this as a norm. And if you pay close attention, it becomes a moving target. Because if you get good at this one, then it's going to change and it's going to reveal some new information, which really isn't new information, by the way. It's just going to have a different name. And so now this becomes the new wave, the new hot button, hot ticket item. So just to give you an example of what I'm talking about, I remember when Steve Harvey's book came out. What was it? Think like a woman, think like a man, act like a woman. Right? I'm, yeah. And that thing ran through like wildfire. And then there was a movie that came out about it. And when the movie came out, you had all types of stars. You had Kevin Hart, you had what's his name, Michael Ealy, a couple other people. I can't even name all of them. And these were big high ticket actors and actresses. Why? Because it's the influence that is trying to attract. And so if you ever read the book, I'm sorry. No, I'm not sorry. If you ever read the book, you will realize that there is nothing like even in the midst of trying to focus on biblical scriptures, it turns away from the scriptures almost immediately. And I'm not saying anything negative about the young man. I mean, he's done a lot of great things in his life. But I think there is only one space that we can go to have a full understanding of relationship. And what you'll see in society is that they're not necessarily focusing you in that direction. They're focusing you on the thing that will almost guarantee failure, heartbreak, unsuccessful relationships. And that's kind of like my point. So when you look at it, they have a huge influence because they're on the TVs, they're on the big screens, they're on the radios, like all this other stuff. And so what's hot today is not necessarily hot tomorrow. I seen a video out, YouTube video talking about what's the young lady, Sexy Red, right? So one minute she's hot, next minute she's not. So that's kind of like what I'm saying. Like when we lean to those things and we allow them to continue to penetrate our ears and penetrate our eyes and things of that nature on a consistent basis, it influences what you do in the space of relationship. And that is a very dangerous game. Any thoughts or comments in relation to what I'm saying there?
No thoughts or comment, but I did think about the influence that you talked about, the social media, or because we're all, this is the environment and the space that we're in. I did think about that. But I also think I thought about the peers and the people who we choose to have in our environment as well, because they have a great influence as well. And so and that's why it's important for us to choose what information we're consuming. That's from any environment that we're in, and then filter it and make sure that it lines up with what you say you believe. So that's something I want to add.
Absolutely, absolutely. I like what the journey is saying there. She said it shapes a perception. Shapes a perception, the framework of expectation, behaviors, and values, which influence how love, partners, and family dynamics are viewed. Absolutely.
Mhm.
Remember, perception is the lens that I view the world in. Okay. Perspective is, well, I'm sorry, perception is the lens that I receive information through. Perspective is the lens that I view the world through. So we have to realize that based like our perceptions are driven based upon our perspective. So when the culture injects, teaches, so forth and so on, I'm talking parenting at first. So when we look at what's injected into a child, that kind of influences how that child reacts and responds to the world. And so now the perspective that's given to that child now ends up being the perception that they receive from the world when they go in. So if that child is made to believe that they are, beautiful and all this other great stuff at a very young age, then when they go out into the world, they're looking at the world, expecting the world to tell them that I'm beautiful. But if the world gives them information that's not congruent with what is being taught, now what you have is anxiety. So we gotta understand these things. We gotta be completely transparent, be honest, help our children to understand something more deeper as opposed to the things that are temporal. The Uncle Junior Network, brother, I appreciate you, man. Always, I mean that brother, man. If you guys know Uncle Junior,
Thank
awesome guy, great brother. Greatly appreciate him,
you.
and always adds value wherever he goes. Just so that everybody know, anything that's actually given to this network is given back to you in one shape, form, or fashion. So we're always looking to improve what we're doing, always looking to get better, and always looking to connect and collaborate with different people as well. So, brother, I appreciate you and thank you so much. Bring up that next comment that Journey has up there, please. I think this was in reference to the book.
Yeah.
He said, my mom purchased this book for my sister and me, and I asked her, how is that possible? And so she said it at the book end. So this is my point. Like when you read the book, you're like, wait, what? Okay,
Mhm.
thank you, but no thank you. But on the other hand, there's a lot of people who started like living their life according to what's in that book.
Mhm.
So, I thank God that you had enough forethought, common sense, if you will, to realize like, no, this ain't working. So thank you for that. So Michelle says the societal norms are shaped for a self-fulfilling fallacy. Yeah, I absolutely, I definitely agree with that. Because in essence, there is no means to an end. They're not pointing you to a higher authority. They're pointing you to, and I hate to say this because I know you guys think I don't care about feelings, and that's not true. But they're pointing you to something that is a moving target. They're pointing you to focus on how you feel. Well, how does how you feel benefit the relationship? Well, it doesn't. It now becomes a egocentric thing, and anything that is focused on the ego will always elevate itself to me, protecting me, valuing me, and me. That's not a relationship. You know what I'm saying? I'll tell you what it is later. Anyway, um, moving on to the next question, please. No, I'm sorry. We're in the next section. The power of relationship focus, self awareness. The power of self awareness and reflection, which is all relationship focus. So, how can we balance self awareness and reflection with active participation in our relationships? You're muted.
When I read this question and went through it, I one of the things that I thought about was participating in a relationship. Okay, so I thought about the communication. So when we're in relationship with someone, we have an ideal of when something is off, right? Because we're connected, but we should be. And you can identify if there's some change in behavior. And so, therefore, I think it's important not to allow that to continue to dwell, but to begin to ask questions because you want to make sure you remain in harmony. And so, I think that's one of the balances of being self-aware in relationship because you can identify change and then you can address it and not allow it to linger and it keeps you in harmony as I said earlier.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think we got to understand first and foremost self awareness and reflection. This is kind of like why I went where I went with the whole feelings thing, because we got to understand anytime my ego is a part of our relationship, then the relationship is going to be manipulated to serve me. In other words, my ego will always express itself at the level of my feelings because it's all about me, it's protecting me. Okay. When it comes down to me being self aware, that means that I am understanding. I am not necessarily understanding, but I am aware of the things that I'm doing. when I'm doing those things, what triggers are what thing trigger me to behave a particular type of way. So it is a constant reflection that is happening in me. If this happened, I responded this way. I be to myself for a moment and ask, why did I respond this way? Okay. That's important, but it becomes more important when I take it and point it back to the relationship. Why did I respond this way? Now that I understand that why I responded this way, was my response helpful to the betterment of the relationship, or was it harmful? If it's harmful, I have a responsibility to change. I need to make the change for me to show up better in this relationship so I can be a partner. That's the key. So when we look at this right here, it is important to understand that I have to always be responsible for my behavior without question. I can't say, well, when you did this, that made me. No, no, I'm passing blame now. Even if, and at least I'm just going to use you as an example because you're up here. Even if Lisa called me everything but a child of God, right here on camera in front of everybody. If I clap back, y'all know how we do. If I clap back, the clap back is my fault. I'm not saying that she's not at fault for calling me everything but a child of God on on the platform right here. But the clap back is my responsibility. That's my behavior. What we do a lot of times is we say she was wrong. She ain't had no business doing that. Blah 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 blah. Her. But the clap back was okay. I give you a perfect example. No,
No.
I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it.
Go ahead, please do it. Go
I'm
ahead.
not going to do it. Okay, fine. Since you forced the hand, um, what was the thing the butch made body? You know what I'm talking about?
I knew you was gonna go there.
Yeah,
Yes, the
wrong.
B6, the B6. That's what
B6.
they
That's like I can't remember. Wrong. Now, don't get me wrong.
Mhm,
She was wrong too, but
mhm,
y'all know the saying: two wrongs don't make a right.
mhm.
So the clapback is always wrong, but we don't ever. We'll praise the clapback. That's a cultural thing for us, and we got to stop that. It's not the right cultural thing. It just happened to be a cultural norm.
Mhm.
So my behavior is always my responsibility. And if I want this relationship to thrive, I need to be able to assess my behavior. And in assessing my behavior, plot the course so that I can adjust my behavior so I can be a full time participant in the relationship. I knew somebody was going to put it in there. Bleach, blind, but I can't say too many B's. So you got to realize, man, back in the days, I used to say B's and it wasn't nothing like that. So I try to avoid B words as best I possibly can these days. But yeah, what you just said. Um, but yeah, that's the key. The key is the relationship is the most important person in the relationship.
Mhm.
So when my ego shows up and say, well, you know what, this thing here, now it kind of fights against the relationship. I'm trying to swing the pendulum in my direction. And when I do that, now what I do is I make Lisa serve me. And that's where it becomes a very dangerous game. That's why I say what I say about feelings. It's not that your feelings aren't valid, they need to be put in this proper perspective. Once the feelings are put in this proper perspective, now you can think logically and plot the course to being, better connected with the person that you're in a relationship with. But if the feelings is always at the top, then the only thing you're going to do is make that person bow down to your feelings every time. And it always happens that way. Any other thoughts you want to add to that, Lisa? Because I know that wasn't a very popular response, and I'm okay with that.
No, no. I mean, that is the correct response because we are all responsible for when we go stand before and receive judgment, we're gonna be by ourselves. So every response, every behavior is our responsibility. Doesn't matter what the other person does. The scripture says a soft reply turns away wrath. So you don't have to respond in the same manner that someone else is, even though they're wrong. Because there's a way that you can do it. You can address it, but it's not publicly. So no, I'm not disagreeing.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, there you go. I was looking for that one. So the journey says, I think it involves a mindful approach, ensuring personal growth while fostering healthy and fulfilling connections. Absolutely, absolutely. It is essential Am I back? Can you hear me? Okay. All right. Just wanted to make sure. Me and AT&T, we having this relationship thing right now, so we got to work it out. Um, there you go with the AOL thing again, huh? Anyway, yeah, I don't know why I'm even seeing the what you call it in the upper left hand screen. Whatever. Show must go on. Um, it's essential that we always, again, remember the relationship is the center, not me. So, in order for me to esteem someone else higher than myself, I need to understand that, or we're going to look at it through the lens of competition. We're not in relationship to compete with one another. We're in relationship to collaborate with one another.
I
I'm
was
sorry.
saying to become one. That's
Right. Okay. Gotcha. Yeah, we're in relationship to collaborate with one another. So um when we collaborate with one another, does that mean there are times, and again, I'm using Lisa because she's up here, does that mean that there are times where Lisa, things are happening right now to where she's at the front? Absolutely. Will there be times where things happen when I'm at the front? Absolutely. But that's what collaboration is all about. It's not about who's the most important person, because it's always a relationship. It's recognizing that the relationship is the most important person, so that people can exist together in collaborative environments to where we both thrive. So that's kind of like that. Now, I thank you for saying that, Journey, because you're absolutely right. The Uncle Junior, here come them dimes, y'all. One thing we can do, one thing we can do is make time and self-reflect on the relationship to better understand it, allowing better actions on our part. Absolutely. Absolutely. Spot on, sir. Thank you for that. Michelle says, we know when feelings are put in the forefront, cognitive responses go out the window. Stay in the conversation and respond intelligently. Yeah, so they don't go out the window, they're slowed down drastically. When you're highly elated, your ability to process information slows down drastically. It is a common thing. And then you end up coming out of that conversation and you may say something like, I should have said this, or I could have responded like this. So that becomes part of that dangerous game that we end up playing. All great responses, and thank you for that as well. Remember, questions are always invited. Now,
Coach, can I ask you a question?
like I said, questions are always invited.
Okay. So you said when we come out of the conversation, you said we wish we had have said this, and we're doing the reflection, I guess, after the fact.
Hmm. Hmm.
So can you help with the some tools that can be used so that it doesn't get to that point? Are there any
Which
tools you can recommend as to what we can do in that environment when it is heightened, so that we don't respond emotionally? Are there any?
absolutely,
Okay.
absolutely. Next question, please.
No.
No, I'm not trying to be funny. What
Okay.
specific practices or activities have you found most effective in increasing your self awareness
Okay.
regarding your behavior and
Okay.
beliefs in relationships?
Okay. Okay.
So I'll go first for this one.
Okay.
Since you asked the question, I think one of the most important things that we need to understand, and I think you mentioned it earlier, is understanding mindfulness techniques. Right, being able to center yourself is what we call it. Is an important thing. Right, we need to exercise controlled breathing. Right, one of the things that happens when we get into a heated discussion is our heart rate start, it increases, your core temperature raises, all of those things. So you need to bring yourself back down. How do we do those things? Well, again, control breathing. Whatever you're thinking about right now, go to a happy place. It's not that you're removing yourself from that conversation, but you need to find that space. And sometimes you may say, hey, just give me about 30 seconds, right? Because I feel myself getting a little flustered. Give me about 30 seconds. I'm not leaving the conversation. I just need to center myself so I can make sure that I'm fully present, right? That's another technique. It is also important to, once we get to the point to where the emotions, we're not flooded with the emotions, it is also important to ask questions, because what you may understand is that your limiting belief is kicking in while that person is actually trying to talk to you. So that person is talking about your behavior. You think they're talking about your character. So all of these things, effective breathing, right? Making sure that Your thoughts are positioned in the right place. You know, your body posture factors in as well. If you're, and I can't tell you scientifically right now how it works because it'll take too long, but your body posture plays a huge deal in how you respond. A lot of times we're kind of slouched and whatever the case may be. And when somebody's talking, like we may lean in, we got that little frown on our forehead. All of these things, we might be guarded like this right here when you're talking. So all of these things help you to understand that I'm in a defensive posture. So on the other side of the conversation, I can stop. Once I see that defensive posture happen, I can automatically stop. So wait, you seem a little on edge right now. Is everything okay? I can have that conversation in the midst of it. So it's not just one person, it is both. Remember, this is a collaboration. When you witness your partner becoming defensive, pause for a second. Say, you seem to be defensive. What help me to understand where we are before we continue in this conversation. So there's a number of techniques that you can actually use. But again, my boundary, my yard, my work. So it's my responsibility to center myself. So I need to focus on breathing. I need to make sure that my mind is in the right place, not looking at you as though you're the enemy or a demon straight from the pits of hell. That's another thing that we do in the midst of conversation. Remember, y'all was all lovey-dovey about 2 hours ago. So what happened? You know, that person started being honest with you and now they got horns growing at their forehead? No. It's just that they're not stroking your ego right now. That's all it is. It's okay. It'll be all right. Right. So it's important for us to acknowledge these things. Okay. Yeah, absolutely. That's why I said for 30 seconds. Ask the person, is it okay if I take 30 seconds to recenter myself because I don't want to leave the conversation? So you're absolutely right. Um, what are your thoughts on this? Like, I mean, I know I've said some things and I probably repeated a couple of things a couple of times, but those are simple things that we can do in the moment.
No, I mean all those things are important because as you said that the posture when we're having a conversation tells us a lot. It tells us if you're connected, if you're in the conversation, or you're thinking more about how you feel about the conversation. So the behavior, like you said, and the character are two different things, and I think that's important to understand as well. Because I'm not criticizing your character, but we're talking about a behavior that we have to address, and so reevaluating that within ourselves in the moment, because there's so many things that we have to do in the moment of these conversations, and there's so many things that we don't know that may be going on in our body scientifically that we have to understand. One thing that I learned when I was doing reading one of the books that Coach suggested that I read, when the Dr. Caroline Leaf talked about how many thoughts we have per minute. It's like thousands of thoughts we have per minute, and they're actually going through our mind, and we're experiencing them and we're conceptualizing them in the moment. So we have to be mindful. That's why examining ourselves. That's why choosing to be in the conversation in the moment is so helpful, so that we won't take ourselves outside of it and then try to I'm gonna use this word the coach used earlier. I don't like, but try to be the victim instead of being a participant in the conversation, so that we can come to a conclusion. Because I like the coach says this, and I wish we can say it 100 more times so people can really truly understand what it means. The relationship is the most important person in the relationship, because if we focus on we're in this union together, and if our focus is on the relationship, trying to make sure that we are together in this covenant relationship together, and we want it to grow and we want it to be strong, we want it to be healthy, I think that is the focus that we should have in any engagement that we go into.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's essential. Bring that question up, please. It is essential for it to happen. The Uncle Junior himself. How do we deal with people who may not be self-aware of some of their behaviors that may be affecting the relationship in a negative way? Well, there's two ways I look at this. First and foremost, I should have waited. I'm just being honest. I should have waited to be able to identify those behaviors. This is why I'm an advocate of not rushing to the finish line. Those of us who rush to the finish line will encounter this because people have and it's not that the person is a bad person. I want to make sure I'm saying that. But the person could have been wearing a mask, presenting themselves to be the person they think you want to see in real time. So we have to be able to see people in all different lights when it comes down to, personal interaction. Now, remember, this conversation is about limiting beliefs. So I want to make sure that we address that as we're going forward. So I have to rid myself of any preconceived assumptions that this person may be, or whatever the case may be, when observing how they behave in real time. So that's why I say I always wait to see a thing at least 2 to 3 times before I address it. Now, when we get to this point and I address the behavior, right, and they may not be self aware, right, of their behaviors, and you hear it, I didn't do that, I don't do that, or I did this because I didn't ask you any of that. I only address the observation. You're talking about this, like I care. You're talking about the reason why, like I get, like none of those things matter. The only thing that matter at this point is what I'm addressing. So my response is like, okay, I got that, but this is the observation. This is the behavior. Well, but this is the behavior, right? So the issue becomes at this point, if we can't stay focused on the fact that's presented, then ask that person a particular question. Do you realize that every time I mention anything about you, you always divert it to something else? Is that common? Do you do that often? Has anybody ever told you that before? So now you're kind of, it's almost like you're grabbing their hand and walking them through the door of self-awareness. Now, if that person say, nope, nobody ever told me that before in my life, Houston, we got a problem. I'm just being honest. This is going to be a situation that's going to take an enormous amount of patience to get that person there. And just because you get them there, that does not mean happily ever after. You got to realize sometimes you may have been in that person's life to help them get there. So I think this is a phenomenal question because this stems a lot from those cultural norms that we were talking about. Some of us will not take responsibility for our actions to save our lives. I'm sorry. It is what it is. It's it's one of those things. Now, I believe a lot of people are coming into the space of recognizing that and they're like owning it. But you got to realize, even in the space of attempting to do so, the old habits will still attempt to show up. So we got to be careful with that. So I love this question. I think this is a great question. Lisa, do you have anything you want to add to this question?
No, as you were saying that, I was thinking about an example, and you gave it. You gave the example of identifying, helping someone identify a behavior, and them being totally against acknowledging that this is a behavior that I have is a journey.
Mhm.
And so you have to be patient in those relationships with people. But like you said, it's just helping them along the way in the journey, you
Right.
know. And so that's the only thing that I was thinking about as you were sharing that. That's all.
No, no, I greatly appreciate that. And I'm seeing practicing empathy and all of those are techniques that I can use. It
Hmm.
does not guarantee that they overcome. So I want to make sure I'm saying because a lot of and Journey, I know this isn't you by the way, but a lot of times we use the term empathy and we say, okay, well, that's the gateway because empathy, believe it or not, is the hardest thing to teach. But here's the thing that we have to understand about empathy. Empathy does not mean that I need to get in the boat of what you got going on. Empathy simply means that you know what, at one point in time, I get that. I used to do the same thing, right? I understand. I get it. But you know what we're gonna do? We fixing to stay in this boat because we gonna figure it out. We're not getting out this conversation. We're gonna stay in the conversation, we're gonna stay in the fire until we figure it out. Empathy does not mean I give you a pass. Empathy does not mean, okay, well, I understand. We'll just, move on. No. And that's the biggest mistake we make. We take empathy and we conflate it with sweeping it under the rug. Well, I understand that. I see why you would think. Mm-mm, ain't happening. Empathy, I understand that this might be a difficult conversation. I understand that no one has ever like pinned you in a corner. I'm using this as we're not doing that literally. I'm just an example. I understand nobody ever held your feet to the fire as it relates to this. But I need for us to have this conversation because the relationship is dependent upon it. If not, then what I'm telling you right now is that too many, you know, too much continuation of this style of behavior is not going to be healthy for the relationship in the long run. So, is the relationship important for us to have this conversation, or is your ego more important at this particular point in time? Because that's really what we're trying to figure out. And sometimes you just got to ask a very difficult question straightforward. You know how it goes. Bad news don't get better with time. So, great question. What if your self awareness is clouded by reflections of your previous conversations? How do you separate the two? Lisa, would you like to start with that one?
Clouded by reflections on your previous conversation. So it sounds like there's some, I guess, some residue from the previous conversation that's carried over. Okay. Um, so if you're clouded, then I think that's some work that we are required to do within ourselves. And that means that's a part of that work is asking questions so you can get clarity. So if you didn't understand something and you came out of the conversation and with probably still some questions or understanding, then you need to go back because you want to be clear. You want to be clear about what you're talking about. If you still have more questions, or if you're still concerned, or if there's still something that you're thinking about, then that means you have to have an additional conversation in order for you to get clarity. I think that's the most simplistic way to address it.
Yeah, I like that. The word clouded, um, I like it, but I also want to give a different perspective as well. Um, because if my previous conversation was done correctly, I should have left that conversation knowing something I didn't know before going in that conversation. So if my thoughts are clouded by the lessons that I learned from that conversation, that's actually a good thing. If I learned something from the previous conversation that I did not know about myself, maybe it's just uncomfortable for me and I feel it's clouded. So that's where I would start at. Now, is it possible that, you know, there was a conversation that took place and I didn't get clarity, like Lisa said, or something happened in the past? I didn't necessarily address it because I'm trying to shake this pot all the way around and look at it from different sides, right? A conversation that took place in the past and I didn't necessarily address it. And now this conversation is happening. And because this conversation is happening, I'm recalling the time to where something happened. I didn't necessarily, no, we're not doing that. We're going to stay in the conversation that we're currently having. Once we have this conversation, then by all means, we can go back and entertain anything that took place prior to. But we got to be careful because, again, these are all techniques that people tend to use to divert. We like to divert information. I don't. This is uncomfortable for me, so let me do a diversion technique, right? Let me go back and ruminate because I'm ruminating based upon how I feel, not necessarily what I learned. And so, when we say clouded, I wonder: are we talking lessons learned? Are we talking the remembering of the emotions? Are we talking about a past thing that happened that I never fully addressed? So all of those things exist within that cloud. What we have to do for ourselves is figure out which one are we talking about. If it's a lesson, and I know it's a lesson, but I don't feel good about a lesson, then that means, and I hate to say it this way, that means I need to get over myself. If it's something that if I'm ruminating about the feeling from the previous conversation, and again that conversation had a lesson, again, get over yourself. If it's something that I didn't address prior to, notice this is all going to sound the same, by the way. Something I didn't address prior to, and now we're in a conversation. I remember I didn't address it. Get over yourself. So it really didn't change because everything about me stems from me. So it's always going to be the same thing. I am responsible for my behaviors, not anybody else. That's why I started with the Lisa cursing me out on camera. Well, yeah, if I clap back, my fault. Now what she did is her fault. So at this point, I have the perfect opportunity to have an adult conversation, minus the clapback. Once I clap back, there is really no conversation that I can have now because I'm just as guilty as she is. So, what we have to do is again make sure that we're consciously aware of what is happening in real time when it comes down to what it is we're trying to do. Remember, the goal is a collaborative, fully functioning relationship, not me trying to be right. If I am focused on wanting to be right at any given point in time in a relationship, so my ego's in the way, and my ego is stifling the relationship. Go ahead, Lisa.
So, Coach, you're saying that when you respond in a certain way, you, in essence, you can damage. Okay.
You ain't even got to finish the rest. The answer is yes. And I'm not trying, I get it.
Okay.
Listen, I want people to understand I'm not rejecting the fact that we're human,
Mm-hmm.
but just because we're human does not give us the right to damage other people. It doesn't give us the right to abuse anyone else. It's just that we're human. So, because we're human, we can exercise empathy. Once I learn to not put my humanity above yours, that's where we get into error all the time. See, we like to use, and again, Journey, I know this isn't you. We like to use the word empathy, but what we're really saying is that I want you to have empathy for me. I'm still working on having empathy for you, but you need to have empathy for me because that's how most people think. Humanity, right? So if my flesh is the authority, and you guys who you diamond members know what I'm saying. If my flesh is the authority, then I will always put me above everybody else. But once I learn to put my flesh in its proper position and realize that the flesh is subject to the mind and the mind is subject to the spirit, right? Therefore, the connection, the battleground is always in the mind, right? Once we do that, then the flesh doesn't drive anything. We recognize the flesh because the flesh makes us legal, but the flesh is not the deciding factor of anything. It is always the spirit. So yes, great questions. I love it. I love it. I love it. Keep them coming. Reframing negative thoughts. Now, this is huge because this is the results of self-reflection, right? We self-reflect to identify those thoughts. We ask ourselves questions about those thoughts, but then here we go because, like Lisa said, within a day I can have thousands of thoughts, and some of us may feel like, well, you know what? I can't control my thoughts. Okay. Next question. How can practicing cognitive reframing improve not only our relationship, but also our overall mental and emotional well being?
Wow, this is a good one, because it's something that I have been practicing for a few years now, and so understanding what our thoughts are. For years, honestly, I thought that when I had thoughts and they continue to come back, that they had control. But then when I learned that I have control of the thoughts and that I can give those thoughts, I can not allow them to have free course to roam around in my mind, and I understood that, I began to practice making sure that they did not dwell. And because when you have those thoughts and you don't take control of them, then they direct your day almost. You can say they direct your day because they have a say so in your day because you are allowing them to. And so what you have to do is you have to take every thought into captivity and then put it under the word of God. That's what I had to learn to do. And so when they come, my practice was to just write them down, and as they diminish, cross them out. And I kept doing that, and I've done that. And I have to go back and repeat this often sometimes, because it's a process of constantly renewing your mind. It's a process of renewing, and we have to do that every day. So that's one of the things that helped me reframe some of the in my cognitive reframing, so that I would not allow the thoughts to try to control my day. Because when we wake up each morning, brand new mercies I see. These are my thoughts now. It's not waking up with the same thing that I went to sleep with. And so we have to be mindful that our thoughts do not have free reign. We have control of them, and um we can reframe them.
I love that. I like the technique that you use there. That is a great technique. Um, I kind of want to paint a picture before I get all the way there, um, because you have an identity, right? Who you know yourself to be, and the issue with your identity is that for most of us, a majority of us, we've been given a false identity. So who we think ourselves to be, that's not really who we are. So after your identity, it drives a concept of who you are, right? So the conceptual you, the conceptual you then gets to the esteemed you, and the esteemed you now exposes itself in social settings. So in essence, who I show up to be in relationship can be traced all the way back to my identity. Therefore, when I see behavior happening in the relationship, I can say, oh, that person has low self-esteem. Why? Because they're pining for attention. Give me, give me, give me, give me, give me. How do I look? What, you know what I'm saying? What do you think about this? So forth and so on. That person who is seeking attention, I can quickly and easily say that person is struggling with this thing called self-esteem. And in further conversation, we can go all the way back and say, well, because that person didn't get the necessary attention they needed from daddy, mama, combination of both, or stuff of that nature. Very simplistic equation to get to this point, because in essence the way that we frame information, right, is how that information is revealed. So for me, I frame it, and this is everybody, you frame the information through the lens of your perspective. That's why I explained the difference between perspective and perception previously. Perception is the information that I'm receiving, perspective is the window that I view the world through. So I frame the information from through the lens of my identity, who I know myself to be. Therefore, you guys who can relate to this, when I see a thing, I can't do that. Why not? Because I got to be twice as smart. I got to work twice as hard. All false information. So all of this bad information given to you back then is an issue, because when you get to the point of relationship, you're now looking at relationship through the lens of that. Oh, wait, there was also some information given back here. Happily ever after, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. I got a pumpkin. The pumpkin expires at midnight, and then Prince Charming shows up and put the slip on my feet, and then he rescued me. All of that stuff is false information. But if it was embedded in your psyche at a very young age, it exists at the subconscious level, whether you want to admit it or not. Now, how do we get to the point of recognizing some of these limiting thoughts? And these limiting thoughts, which is rejecting the presence of a fuller, richer relationship and making the relationship about me. Well, we have to first identify it. Okay. If going back to, I can't get over the fact Lisa cursing me out on TV. Going back to that, if Lisa wanted to reframe that again, what got me to the point in behaving? Remember, when you look at the lineage of your identity, concept, esteem, social. So when you got to social, what was the thing that happened in the social setting that made you respond the way that you responded? Oh, where he said that women ain't worth nothing. I would never say that, by the way. She just heard that. Joking. Okay. So when he said that, then that made me respond based upon my esteem, because it has to go back. Okay. Does that mean, even though he said what he said, was it necessary for you to curse him out? You see what I'm saying? It's not that even though he said the thing, it's not that the thing he said was right. What he said was wrong. But did I have to respond that way? So now, again, my boundary, my yard, my work. So now I go back. What is it about my esteem that made me express myself in that manner? Well, because I believe that, I am valued. I believe I'm important. That's true. There's nothing wrong with that. Okay, now we got to go back. Concept. What is the concept of all of this stuff, and how does it? So you see what I'm saying? So once I identify that thought that in my mind, I realize that it doesn't serve the relationship well. Now I need to reframe it. It kind of relates to Lisa writing it down and submitting it to the Word of God. So I'm gonna go back to I got to be twice as smart and work twice as hard. Well, is there any evidence to support that? No, there's no evidence that says I have to be twice as smart. I have to be work twice as hard. That's somebody else's revelation that came from an error to where that may have been true and may have been a result of their experience. Well, if that doesn't apply to me, how can I reframe that to where it says something different? Different. I am twice as smart as what I thought I was. I'm twice as smart of what I thought myself to be. I work twice as hard of what of what I really sometimes feel. So now when I reframe that, that puts it in a more positive light. So reframing thoughts can actually change that thought from a negative thought to a positive thought. And now that becomes the lens that you see the world through. And because that becomes the lens that you see the world through, you can now express that in a social setting. That was a lot. Your thoughts on what I just said?
That's work. Like you said it was a lot, but it's work, because when you have to be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that is work, because now you're unlearning the things that you learned and that was passed on to you from generation to generation. And then you have to relearn, and then you have to be able to apply it. So this is the one thing that I am mindful of, that in that process, that it's going to be an ongoing process, and it's okay. We're constantly unlearning, relearning, and then applying. But you have to be mindful to give yourself some grace, because sometimes some of those things are going to come back up. But you have, now that you have the tools and you're equipped to address them, you can continue to address them, and they will diminish. They will begin to diminish. So it's work. It's a process. It's work, and it's worth it. And guess what? It's uncomfortable. Really uncomfortable.
Absolutely is. And listen, you're not going to get it right the first time.
Yeah.
You're not going to get it right the second time or even the third time. You may need somebody to help you do it. Because trust me, a lot of times we struggle. We're honest with other people, right? We say that we're our own worst critics, but we're also the person that gives ourselves the most grace of anybody else. Right? We give ourselves more grace than what we give another person. So in order to overcome that, you're going to need someone to actually say, no, what is the real answer? Because generally the first answer is not the right answer. So that's why I like to ask questions. Why? 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 Generally by the third why, you're being honest, because we're breaking through layers now. So again, I love that question. I know, yes, we are. I love that question. I know it's a lot of details behind it. You may have to listen that over and over and over again, but listening to it and practicing it is two different things. And it can be a painful process to realize that I'm not as great as I had myself in my mind. That's okay. Because once I get to the point of recognizing that I'm not as great as I had myself or perceived myself to be in my mind, then I can recognize the greatness in other people. It also works in reverse. I'm not as bad as I think I am either, because you got to realize everybody's story and experience is different. So you're not as bad as you think you are either. And therefore, you don't have to cower behind other people because they walk around like they're great. So remember that you're not as bad as you think you are, and you're not as great as you think you are. You're in the middle, and that's what makes humility such a wonderful thing, which is the only way that you can really truly understand the word love anyway. Okay. Let me see. I think we had some. Bring up Uncle Junior's statement. I want to make sure I'm understanding it. Sounds like this question falls under the lines of it. Absolutely does, sir. Absolutely. Absolutely. The journeys, that self accountability for some is a lost art. Just saying, you're absolutely right. And in some cases, I would say in most cases, it not only is lost, it is untapped. Some people have never even tapped into self accountability because they come from environments to where daddy always said, "Well, it's okay, baby. We're gonna fix it. Don't worry about that. That's all right. We'll figure it out." Right? Instead of saying, "Okay, what are you gonna do? This is the situation you got yourself in. Now, what are we going to do to fix it?" So I love that. Poor man, Dr. Phil, good to see you, bro. He said, putting the control in your hands and not the world. Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, moving on, because we answered both questions there. Building a growth mindset. Remember, I want to make sure I'm clear and not abandon the point. We're talking about relationships, first of all, first and
Mhm.
foremost, and how to overcome limiting beliefs in relationships. So, how do you differentiate between a fixed mindset and a growth mindset in the context of relationships?
Okay, I'm going to ask you, do you mind if I read something? Do you mind? Okay. A fixed mindset in a relationship refers to the belief that a personal qualities, abilities, and the nature of the relationship itself are static and unchangeable. Individuals with a fixed mindset may view challenges, conflicts, and setbacks as indicators of inherent flaws within themselves, or limitations leading to avoidance or difficult conversations, or the effort to improve the relationship. So when I was reading that, I wrote that down because I was like, when we have a fixed mindset, it's like we lock up anything that's going to be able to come in and change it and help influence it, because we are set on doing it our way, and we cannot grow. We have to release some of these concepts and beliefs that we grew up with, because the most difficult thing is going in and changing something that you feel like is the core of your belief, the very essence of what you were brought up and you were taught, and who taught it to you. So if you don't understand that as we grow each and every day, and as we're learning, and that we have to be able to change it, we have to be able to release some of those things, because you have made them a part of you, which we should have never done. But what we have to do is we have to go in and we have to make sure that we're not avoiding conversations because it's not comfortable for us, because it's not a part of our belief system. We have to make sure that we're so stuck on not changing because I like who I am. You may like who you are, but other people may not like who you are, and it may not work for the relationships that you are trying to enter into. And I
That was good. Really, I started to fan the flames for a second over here. No, you're absolutely right. Um, you hear it a lot. People will say, "I'm not good enough," or "I don't feel like I'm good enough for whatever." Right? That is coming from a space of limitation. You have created the limitation in your mind, and because whatever you're experiencing in that particular moment, that is there to grow you, you're rejecting it because you don't want to put forth the effort. Right? I'm too old to change. Fixed mindset. Your age has absolutely nothing to do with your ability to grow. And when we create that, what we're telling everybody else is that, oh, you just got to accept me for who I am. Oh, yeah, by the way, that's another one. I just want somebody to accept me for who I am. Fixed mindset. No one should ever accept you for who you are. That is a false assertion, because it rejects the notion that whoever you are right now, you're only there so that you can grow from that position. That is everybody's position. Everybody is on a journey. Part of the journey means that you must move. Part of, like, if you really understand what the Bible says, it is inherent that you grow. Kind of makes sense that the Bible refers a lot to seed, time, harvest, garden, all that other great stuff. Why? Because seeds grow. So we got to understand a fixed mindset is detriment to not only to yourself, but to your relationship. All of them, not just one in particular, every last one of them. We have to get to the point to where we identify whatever version of fixation exists in us, okay, and root it out. If a thought that I am having, has any limitations in it, get rid of it. It has to go. Get it out as soon as you possibly can. Reframe it, whatever that looks like. Because when it stays around, it takes root, it festers, it grows, it actually sprouts, it bears fruit. And that is the dangerous part about it. Trust me, there's good fruit and bad fruit. I'm sorry, don't get it twisted. right? They're fruit that you can eat that can actually have you in the hospital. We got to be consciously aware of any version of fixation that exists in us, and we're claiming to want to be in a relationship or looking for a relationship or desiring relationships. And I'm talking relationships overall, because that degree of fixation is stagnation in the relationship. You're saying that this relationship will not grow. That's what you're saying up front. Every version of limitation that exists. Now, I think that's important when you bring up Miss McCoy's question, because this is the key, and this is why I said previously that that's why humility is the gateway to love. You can't get to love without getting to humility, because here's the thing you need to understand. The scripture says clear when Christ was asked which are the greatest two commandments. He said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. Pause. Where did I learn how to do that from? Who in my house taught me how to love God with all my heart, with all my soul, with all my mind? Not one person. Okay, cool. But then he says there's a second one: love thy neighbor as thyself. Hmm. Okay. Now I can move away from the first one and take what the world taught me for the second one and try to love my neighbor through the lens of what the world taught me. But then I've just rejected everything that took place prior to. So the only way that I can get to the point of loving God is getting to the point of putting down everything I thought I knew so that I can receive everything that He is teaching me. As I receive everything that He is teaching me, now I can actually reverberate it back to Him. And the evidence that I have of reverberating it back to Him is what I share with my neighbors. Because now I am loving my neighbors through the lens of the love that He's loving me through. And that's the only way I can do it. So when you ask this question, what if that person do not have the necessary skills? Ask somebody. Ask for help. It's okay. Nobody will think less of you if you ask for help. Oh, yeah. By the way, the thing that prevents me from asking people for help, limiting belief. That's the key. So the longer we know we need help and do not open our mouth and ask for help, or we kind of hide behind it, glorifying ourselves and say, hey, I'm too old for all that. I'm not fit to go through all that. Limitations. And I'm not saying you're a bad person, right? I'm just saying, hey, if that's what you want to be, as thou believest, let it be unto you. So great question. I'm so glad you asked that question. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Anything you want to add to that, Lisa?
No, yeah, you did it. You answered it. I think you did a good job. I don't need to add anything to it. It's good what you said. And I think sometimes, we have to sit back and reflect on what's being said so we can see if there's some work that we need to do, and I don't think you need to add anything else to it.
All right, all right, all right. Very good. I appreciate that. I appreciate that. So yeah, next is setting and achieving relationship goals. And I think this is the culmination. So
Okay.
the question here is, how do you imagine? Now there's no right or wrong answer to this. It's just how you imagine it. How do you imagine the process of setting relationship goals?
So how do I imagine it? I imagine that we have to sit down and we have to be in agreement on one accord, first of all. And we have to identify what it is that we want in this relationship, and who's a part of it and who governs the relationship. So I think all those things have to be established. We have to know who we're entering the relationship with, and what they believe. So I think that's first. Um, we have to be on one accord, because if not, there's conflict, and we cannot grow in conflict. It actually stunts our growth. And so I believe the process is, the first thing we have to do is we have to sit down. We have to come to an agreement. We set boundaries together. We identify what we are. I'm not going to say. I'm going to say we have to identify what we want in the relationship, and again, who's going to be a part of the relationship. I guess that's my first part. My first thought
Okay,
for the question.
I like that. My first thought, right? to go along with your first thought, because I definitely understand that. My first thought is that we must do it jointly. Now, it's in conjunction with what you just said. We must do it jointly. How do you imagine the process of setting relationship goals? The process is done together. One person by themselves in a closet, on their knees, wearing. I want to get it right, Roland. Wearing a three-piece suit because they just came out from cutting the grass with their collar on. They don't get to decide the relationship, the growth of the relationship in the closet. They don't get to do it that way. Like setting relationship goals is a joint thing for the person that you're in relationship with. I can have an idea of what relationship goals look like for me as long as it lines up with the Bible. But here's the thing for me opening the car door for you ain't a relationship goal. I'm sorry. It's not going to happen.
Yeah.
In fact, I'll tell you straight up right here on the table. I'm not doing that. So those things got to get, that's not even part of the discussion. What is the relationship goal? Because in my mind, the relationship goal must be centered, in my opinion. This is just me. Don't get mad at me. I'm just a messenger. The relationship goal itself, all goals, if I'm being transparent, must be focused on what I'm called to do. That's the process. So if I'm called to do this thing, now this is me, and you got to realize anybody who I choose to join my life up with, now we're coming together and meshing what my relationship goals look like with what their relationship goals look like. That helps us to understand will we be moving forward or not. But my relationship goals, and this is for all relationships, must be centered around what I'm called to do. Anything other than that is not a relationship goal. It's a fantasy. We gotta realize the father gonna get what he want one way or the other. He either gonna get it through you or he gonna get it through somebody else. So the question has to become: do you want to live a life of meaning and purpose, or do you want to live a life of meaningless on purpose? Your thoughts?
No, I mean, I agree. I mean, being on one accord in a relationship and identifying, your purpose and working together, it's the same thing. If you go back to Genesis, they were working together. I saw I think it was on Facebook, and I don't know why this stuck out to me, but it just did. Um, I saw they were in a foreign country, but they lived on this large plot of land, and they were growing their food, and they were, you know, their their meat as well, and they were cooking it together, and they were working together, and they were picking it. I mean, they showed their whole process in their preparation of their food. And I thought that's an example of what it looks like to work together. Both of them were out there working together. And it was simple, but it was something that they did together. And you can tell it was something that they enjoyed. And there was pride in it because they were working together. And I think that's so important. We have to understand the purpose and working toward that purpose, because like you said, no matter what, God's gonna get what he want to get out of either you or somebody else. He gonna get.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Listen, man, I just want to say this has been such a great conversation. So thank you, Lisa, and thank you to everybody in the chats, man. You guys are awesome. I appreciate the value that you've been adding. Um, but this takes us to our bittersweet moments, our final thoughts. So that being said, Lisa Keys, we're gonna give you the floor, and I'm just gonna sit back and listen. And as you kind of just give us what you're thinking.
Reframing is a process. Okay, reframing and changing some of our beliefs so that they won't be limited. The only reason we have limited beliefs because we don't understand what God has for us. There's so much that He loves us so much. He made so many preparations for us. The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. So everything in it, He's already put everything that we need for our life is already there for us. Now it's our responsibility to find it, to connect our lives with it. And I think that is a journey and it is a process, but it's so worth it. Understanding what your purpose is here on this earth and coming together to fulfill it. That's the only thing that I really wanted to say. And I hope that anyone who is in a relationship, or anyone who is considering being in a relationship, that anything that we said here will add value, and that was and can be helpful for you. You can always make sure that you can join us, Coach, on his platform on YouTube, the Power Perspective Network. And there's Reframing the Images of Relationships. There's the Coach's Corner, and there's also the Hearts of Men podcast. So there's so much that we do. We talk about relationships all the time because it is our true desire to make sure that we come into and identify what healthy relationships are. And I hope this was helpful for you today.
All right, the doors of the church are open, y'all. No, I'm joking. Listen, I agree with everything you just said, and greatly appreciate that as well. Thank you. I think this is a great conversation that comes on the heel of the conversation that we had last night. For those of you who were not with us, the past 2 Friday nights, we talked about being a father in the diaspora, the difficulties, the challenges that comes along with it. Well, if you remember when I gave that process to reframing, a lot of that exists from that. And so when you have young men being brought up in an environment to where it is obvious that they are not the prized possession, they are not the prized individual, they are not the focus, the top of the food chain, or anything of that nature. Like it is it's a challenging thing. I don't care what version of social media you can go on. You can hear arguments and debates about this and that as it pertains to a relationship. All is meaningless. Like all of them are just, it has no end to it. It's just a continuation of the same thing over and over again. All this vexation and vanity of the spirit. We have to get to the point to where if there is not a solution, and I'm not saying that there's only one source of a solution. There could be several sources. But if we're not putting ourselves in environments to where solutions are being offered, then what are we doing? Right? If we're just creating confusion on top of confusion, then we are part of the problem. And I think it's time. Time is now. Like if you're my age and I'm 50 years young, I said that intentionally. If you're my age, then you don't have time to waste. You got more years behind you than you got ahead of you. Sure, I'd love to live to see 100, but let's be honest. Statistically speaking, it's probably not going to happen. And here's what I know. I have a handsome grandson that's dependent upon what I'm seeing right now to look different by the time he turns 20. I do not want my grandson, based upon what I'm seeing in the status of relationship, to be in a relationship. If it continues this way, so it takes all of us to do something, do more than like whatever you're doing. I guarantee you can do more. If you're doing nothing, then I'm talking to you. Do something more than what you're doing right now. But if we do nothing, then we're just as guilty as the people who are perpetuating the problem. And that is my final thought. Listen, appreciate you guys. Love you guys. Like Lisa said, go to www.totalmindsetshift.com and join the community. Engage in thought-provoking, meaningful conversations. Join us on Tuesday where we talk Coach's Corner, myself and the Uncle Junior himself, Garfield Martin, the consistency coach. Come Friday nights at 8 p.m., the Hearts of Men podcast. Because next week we're talking about distractions. And trust me, everything that we just got finished talking about is a huge distraction. So that being said, on behalf of, I'm sorry, go ahead. Yes, ma'am.
I also want to, if you can go to my YouTube channel as well, Renew Consideration, and please subscribe to that channel as well.
Yes, I do apologize.
No, it's
it's okay. And yeah, by the way, TikTok tomorrow morning. We do TikTok lives on Sunday morning at 11:30, where we talk nothing but the word of God. So join us. It'll be myself, rolling down the street, poor man Dr. Phil, brother Tawami Gaddy, Lisa Keys, our sister Adrian, a couple other people. So again, join us there as well. Listen, we love you guys. We appreciate you guys. Have a great and wonderful rest of your evening. And do not forget, let the best version of yourself be a blessing to somebody else.